Zimmer, and I'm a UFO author and investigator. I grew up in Rockland County, which is in the Hudson Valley, and all the time there were stories in the local newspaper, so I just assumed UFOs were everywhere until I started lecturing different topics and people would come up to me and tell me their UFO story. And I realized how widespread it was. So I started looking into it, and of course Pine Bush was one of the first places that came up as being a real hot spot. That it goes back to at least the early 1900s. So this is nothing new in the Hudson Valley, and it really is my contention this is the biggest hot spot in the country over the last 100 years. So many people are ridiculed when they tell their story, and there have been some rather unscrupulous productions that have taken place there that make people look ridiculous. When people are seeing massive triangles hovering silently over them for 20 minutes, and they're told it was a formation of planes, it's nonsense, it's insulting. Somebody was trying to cover up something. I can't say what, but clearly authorities were not being honest. When I show this, when I give lectures, I can't tell you how many people, they'll just go, "That's what I saw, that's what I saw." The massive triangle. There was a librarian in Yorktown Heights who was waiting for her husband to get off the bus, and she looked up and she saw this massive triangle. And many people had spotted it, but there were things different about her story. A panel opened up in the center, a circular panel, and she could see up into it. And this was fascinating. She described it as having lighted balconies like the outside of an apartment building. So there were distinct levels to it. Panel closed and the craft took off. But she was incredibly detailed about what she saw and very, very credible. There's a case in Pine Bush where a family observed a circular craft hovering over a field. An investigator came. All of the grass was broken at the same height. There are radar reports, and there were radiation levels 6.5 times normal. Now, do you discount his testimony? If you do, how do you explain the circular impressions in the grass and the high radiation level? There are physical evidence. Hallucinations don't do that. This was a case from 1953 where a man by the name of Hank Vanderbeck was playing with his brothers and friends in the town of Saugerties. And, this is the Cold War, so everybody's worried about the Russians. And they look up and they see this massive cylinder shape, and he described it as having alternating red and green lights like hula hoops over this. And it was just stuck in the sky, not moving. So the kids were scared, they ran and got their parents, the parents got the cops. What are the cops going to do about it? So they called Stewart Air Force Base. They must have had it on radar because they scrambled 3 fighter jets. And these 3 jets are coming right towards this object, and at the last second, it just took off in a blink of an eye, and the jets just went through empty space. The next day, the newspaper said, "Oh, nothing to worry about if you saw fighter jets going up the Hudson. It was just a weather balloon." Again, completely ridiculous for all the people who witnessed it. Over the course of generations, around the world, people are reporting the same exact things. That's startling evidence. If it was any other kind of phenomena, it would be considered some sort of scientific fact. But because it's unexplainable, and there's that ridicule factor, it's discounted. And I can't think of any other field where there is this type of amount of observation and so little credit given to it.
So, how do you know these people are telling the truth?
Really, when people say, "Well, you're going to think I'm crazy," but, when you can see they're reluctant to give that information and they want their identity to remain a secret, and when there were 23 people standing there and they all said the same thing, it's a lot easier for me to say, okay, this is legitimate.
never spoken of this other than to some friends. In 1983, the latter part of the summer, around 8 o'clock at night, I was driving home. My son was in the car with me. He was maybe 10 years old at the time, and we were just pulling up in front of our house. And as I parked the car, I looked towards my front door, and I noticed lights over the top of my roof. Round, colored lights, all different colors, green, blue, yellow, all different colored lights. And I thought maybe it might have been a helicopter or something, but there was no sound. It was just standing, just hovering there. And I knew it was something odd. I just immediately knew it was something different. It wasn't something I had ever seen before. And I kept telling my son, what is that? It's so quiet. I can't even hear it. But it started to move very slowly, just barely moving. Got back in the car and I followed this object till we reached the Springbrook Parkway. I was totally enthralled with the massiveness of this object. I couldn't keep my eyes off of it. It was larger than a football stadium, and it was just standing there. And I watched it, and it just suddenly disappeared. It just instantly flashed away. It was gone. No sound, no motors revved up, nothing like that. I was amazed. I was so enthralled, I couldn't believe it. And when I told people about it, they thought I was crazy. They thought maybe I made it up. But then I heard the next day that 5,000 people saw that same object that night. It was the most massive thing I have ever seen. So that's my story. And I'll never forget it. It still is vivid. I can still see it. I can actually still see it. It was that amazing.